My grandmother, Nobeline Lambert, was murdered in Memphis, Tennessee by my grandfather, Otis Lipscomb, at the age of 25. I'm Mischaela Burroughs, and this is my story. At the time that her murder happened, my mother was only 4. When that happened, siblings were spread across the country living with other aunts and uncles, cousins. So my mother and my Aunt Catherine lived with my great-great-grandfather who raised them. My mother, she was a troubled teen. She did graduate. She did make it to college, but eventually dropped out. She met my father, and they divorced fairly quickly. And then she met my stepfather. In the beginning, as always, people always seem so happy. My stepfather swooped her off her feet, made her feel like she was going to be safe, but she wasn't. My stepfather was not ashamed of his abuse. He began to physically abuse my mother, verbally abuse her in front of me. But my mother actually ended up marrying my stepfather down in Savannah, Georgia. And I remember feeling as a little girl like, why is she doing this? This man has come in, he's abusing you, he's showing you that he's not the right person for you, but you still want to marry him. I was so devastated. I have watched my stepdad punch my mother, strangle her, choke her, kick her. I never really knew what their arguments was about. I would just see him abusing her. The worst that I had ever seen my stepfather do my mother, I go inside and I hear screaming, and I look down the hall and I noticed my stepfather had my mom's face in the toilet. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe she's sick or something. He was literally trying to drown her in toilet water. And that was probably the worst that I had ever seen my stepfather do to my mother. And I started to scream. And when he heard me screaming, he pulled her face back. She was dripping in water, crying. He told me to go to my room. I said no, and you need to get out. And he said, don't worry about it, I'm leaving anyway. And so a couple of weeks after that, he did leave. And my mother told me that he had found another woman. And this woman, I believe he had been seeing her while being married to my mother. This woman was able to have children. My mother wasn't. After they divorced, my mother was very depressed, very bitter and angry towards me, especially because I was the only one in her presence at the time. I never seen anyone come to the apartment. She didn't have any friends at the time. She would literally go to work, come home, cook for me and her, and go to her room. And at that point, at the age of 18, she put me out. But the good thing is, I was always a very persistent girl. So I got a job at the Hyatt downtown, and I ended up staying with one of my best friends. Her mom let me stay with them until I was able to figure out what I wanted to do. Fast forward, I met my son's father. This was my first relationship. Everything was good in the beginning, as it always is, and then he asked me to move in with him. Being a young girl, I was only 19. I said, okay. I moved in with him, and it was the worst thing that I could have ever did. He controlled everything I did. He did not want me to have any friends at the house. Then he told me to quit my job, and I did. As months went on, he began to put his hands on me. My mother has kicked me out. She don't want to have anything to do with me right now. And so I felt alone. Again, I'm the only child, no siblings, nobody I can reach out to. So I ended up getting pregnant with my son. His father was still abusing me even while I was pregnant. He would choke me, punch me. Through all the physical abuse, the verbal abuse, my son was born at 6 months. But he survived. And at that point, I'm like, I have to get out. I have to find a way out. I don't want to end up like my mother, and I don't want to end up like my grandmother. So I did contact my mother. She let me come back. I had my son with me, who was still a baby. I didn't really know how her personality had changed, but it had definitely changed for the worse. I watched my mother go from being a victim to now being an abuser. This was her literally balling her fists up during arguments, punching me, hitting me on my head, pulling my hair, as if we were two women in the streets, but this was my mother. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to leave. For the first couple of years of my son's life, he stayed with my mother while I got myself together. And it took me some time. I was meeting different men and, in and out of people's houses, hotels, just trying to survive. And I ended up meeting my daughter's father, and I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter, Kennedy. His mother was very supportive of me, but he didn't want to have anything to do with me or the baby. He just wouldn't leave that street life alone. His mother called me, I think the year was 2019. She told me someone had murdered him. He was stealing somebody's car. For me, it just changed so much for me. I looked at life so much differently, and I really wanted to get myself together. Growing up, seeing my stepfather abusing my mother, I had a lot of trauma. God always had his hands on my life. He always protected me. And I knew it was because of my children. My children needed their mother. When you have a lot of trauma, it brings on different mental health issues. Over the years of being in these different relationships, being abused by my son's father, going through the things that I went through with my daughter's father, and even dealing with abuse from my own mother, I started to develop PTSD, anxiety, panic attacks. My aunt actually was the one who said, "Have you ever been to therapy?" I went through probably about 5 or 6 therapists before I met the perfect one, who diagnosed me with general anxiety disorder, PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And I deal with that every day. Not really a big fan of medication, but I do things like art. I started to paint, and I also I do a lot of writing. I write a lot. Writing helps to purge a lot of those things that I dealt with over the years of my life. Now I am married. My husband knows my whole life story. We've been together for 12 years. And like I said, it was challenging, but I had to do the therapy. I had to do the work to be able to make this relationship successful. I also started a foundation called Kennedy Safe House Foundation, which is a domestic violence foundation. I wanted to help other victims break this cycle of abuse. And I always tell women, don't worry about clothes, shoes, any of that. If you are in a violent situation and you have a way out, don't worry about that stuff. You can replace clothes, you can replace shoes, but you cannot replace your life. My name is Mischaela Burroughs, and here I am today.